All right, thank you everyone for joining us to talk to Director of Player Personnel, Andy Frank. As always, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. We'll go to Mike Portman.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Andy. I can't get my camera to work, but that's probably good for you, Andy.
Yeah, I probably should turn mine off, shouldn't I?
You're always great about sharing philosophy as far as roster management. Overall, regarding quarterbacks and offensive linemen, where do you guys like to be with those two spots as far as number and then class distribution?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with quarterback. At quarterback, you'd love to every year take a quarterback. In an ideal, perfect world, you'd like to take one quarterback in each and every class, and then it spaces itself out that way. Obviously, we don't live in a perfect world, so things happen and things change. The transfer portal, as we've seen, it has shaped and impacted our room, and it's impacted rooms all the way across the country. So as a result, there's times you're going to take multiple quarterbacks, and we did that this year, and we're excited about both those guys. They'll battle it out with Christian and Cliff, and I think we're excited to see those guys challenge Cliff for a starting job.
Mark Brennan.
Andy, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Hey, along those lines, could you tell us a little bit about Bo and Drew, and how important is it to get those guys in here early? I know you're not necessarily coaching them up, but you have to manage all of this stuff. So how important was that for the staff to be able to get them in at the midterm? Yeah,
I think it's an important piece. It's not the end all be all. We've got about half the class coming in early and half the class coming in. We used to be the normal time. At quarterback, it is pretty important that there's a lot of reps that can happen in spring ball, especially because spring ball is a little bit different than fall camp. In fall camp, you're trying to get guys ready for games and games that we're about to play. So you've got to give those reps to your 1 and your 2. Your 3 and 4s as camp goes on don't get quite as many reps. In spring ball, you can space them out and you can give it to guys, and you can basically structure spring practice to give guys opportunities where they need them. In terms of, for the fall, you're preparing again for that game. So you got to give them game-like reps where they're, seeing, different looks. In spring, it's a little bit dialed back. You can kind of, whatever level they're at, you can give them that look on defense and kind of bring them along that way. So getting these guys in early is huge for us going into next year. So I think that's an important piece for those guys. Circling back to Mike Portman's question earlier about O-line, I got the quarterbacks in. I didn't get the O-line piece of it in terms of roster management. O-line is an interesting one. We've always been a program that likes to be, anywhere between 14 and 16 offensive linemen on our roster. In most years, that means you're bringing in between 2 and 5 offensive linemen. Usually it's probably closer to 3 or 4. What we've seen with the transfer portal, it's a little bit different. I think O-line, Coach mentioned it in his remarks. O-line, I think more often than not is going to be a position that we're going to be interested in the transfer portal. And then the reason for that is it's a developmental position. It takes a while to get guys, to where they can play in games for you. And as a result, every year you're going to be looking at, have a guy that maybe can beat somebody else out on your roster or create depth for you. You can fix, holes there a whole lot easier in the transfer portal than you can sometimes coming out of high school. Whereas at cornerback, you can have a freshman come in and play successfully. Sometimes wide receiver, running back, some other places you can do that. At O-line, it's a very difficult thing to do. And I think as a result, moving forward from a roster management standpoint, I think when we do this press conference every year, I won't be surprised if O-line is one of those positions that we're saying just about every year we're interested in finding somebody in the transfer portal. Mike, hope that answers kind of both parts of your question there.
Donnie Collins.
Hi, Andy. Is that something with the O-line that you kind of look at with Lackawanna as well? Are there certain positions when you guys look at Lackawanna that you look at more? And it's been safeties in the past. It was line today with JB. Is that kind of the same deal with them as it is with the portal at this point?
Well, it's interesting. It's played out. Safety and O-line is really heavy from Lackawanna. I don't want to say that that's a intentional thing. We're looking to see who Lackawanna's best players are and who the best junior college players are, and so as a result, we're not turning away other positions that we think that either whether it's at Lackawanna or other junior colleges across the country that we think can help us. I do think O-line, again, it is a transfer. You're more likely to take a transfer in that regard because they can come in and help you a little bit sooner than maybe some other positions. And safety is a position that, it does take a little bit more experience to play. Corner is a position where it probably takes, sheer athleticism. And if you have that, you probably can step out there day one, or at least, day 29 after practices of fall camp. But safety is one of those ones where you have to, understand the whole defense, be able to get yourself lined up, get other people lined up, and make adjustments. So it's not surprising that that's kind of how it's played out, but I wouldn't say it's a specific, target of ours.
Greg Pickle.
Andy, thanks for your time as always. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, thank you.
What have you learned then, kind of pulling on that thread of the idea of figuring out positions that may or may not be best suited to look for in the transfer portal, or maybe it changes yearly, but what have you learned so far about what it takes to actually recruit the transfer portal? Coach just mentioned the idea that sometimes the recruitment's over before it even begins in some respects. So, and obviously you have to figure out a lot of homework in maybe a short period of time, or it appears that way from the outside anyway. So what have you all learned so far about what it takes to actually successfully do that? You had a really good run last year. What do you have to do to make that something that's a reality moving forward this year and annually?
Yep. Starting off, I would say that, in terms of the positional, what your needs are in the transfer portal, that is going to change year to year. I do think there probably are a couple positions, like I mentioned, O-line. Won't be surprised if D-line is a similar thing year in and year out. We're looking for somebody in the transfer portal. Positions where you're playing lots of guys, you're probably going to have a need in the transfer portal every year for a couple of reasons. One, you need to have more guys that can play, but also two, as a result, you're going to rotate players in the game so that there's reps to go around for those guys. Whereas, let's say tailback, for us, we're probably only playing one tailback per play. So there's not nearly as many reps. If you've got, 2 or 3 you feel really good about, you're probably not looking in the transfer portal for a tailback. Whereas O-line or D-line or wide receiver, for that matter, where you're playing lots of guys, you need to have far more depth to be where you want to be. And so you're going to, search more there. In terms of what we've learned, I think we're always learning and it's always changing. A couple of things that jump to mind is you have to be fast. You have to evaluate guys really, really quickly. Because like Coach mentioned, it does have a feel that there's some guys that already knew where they were going before they were in the portal, before you even had a chance to evaluate them. So you got to be quick with it. But the other piece, and this is where the challenge of the balancing act is, you got to be sure. You don't want to bring a kid into your locker room who's 21 years old or 20 years old, who ends up not being someone that fits your culture or can help your team. And I think that's an important piece of the transfer portal, because what we've found, and I think that probably most programs have found the same thing, is that if you bring a guy into your locker room who helps the team win and beats out one of their friends, the teammates are okay with that, because that guy helps the team win, and that's what they're here to do. They want to win. But if you bring in a guy in who doesn't clearly, prove that he's better than somebody else, and he's potentially taking reps from someone on your roster has, developed a relationship with, that can be a lonely place for that guy who's coming into the locker room. So you've got to be sure. So it's a tricky balance of being fast and being sure all at the same time.
Mike Gross.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for your time. one of the things we hear about all the time is that there's a handful of programs in the country that have these gigantic staffs that could just throw this battalion of analysts at recruiting and the X and O stuff. And presumably this is one of the things that James was talking about in that long conversation that led up to his new contract. Do you feel like this is going to change where you're going to have more resources to scour the country to make those judgments about the transfer portal that you were just talking about?
We hope so. Yeah. I mean, we hope that we're heading in the right direction. Staff size has increased a good amount since we've been here, and it still needs to continue to increase. And that probably will never change. We're always going to have to keep growing and getting larger and better, more efficient as well. But yeah, there is an arms race when it comes to staff size, because you need the people and you need experts and people that have done it before, been through it, to do it successfully. And if someone else has a bigger staff with good employees, they've got an advantage on you. So I think that's why Coach has fought so hard. Every year he's fought to increase the recruiting staff, to increase the analyst numbers. And I'm confident he'll continue to fight those battles, because you see the results of them. The programs that have the biggest army are the ones that are having the most success. And we're trying to do the same thing here.
Daniel Gallen.
Hey, Andy, James was talking about adjustments that was made in terms of staffing and recruiting to recruit in Philadelphia. Obviously, there was a lot of success there this time around, and in-state as a whole. How do you kind of evaluate those changes that you guys made, and just overall the talent level that was available in the state and in Philly that you were able to bring in this year?
Yeah, I think the state of Pennsylvania was a really solid year this year. And like Coach had mentioned, we've kind of gone up and down a little bit in terms of the state as far as the talent that's been here over the last several cycles. This was a very good year in Philadelphia in particular, and for us, kind of like you mentioned, Coach had talked about some kind of things that we had done, the changes that I think they helped us. I don't think there's any one thing that fixes potential past issues that you may have had. I think putting Terry Smith as the area recruiter for a huge chunk of the the Metro Philly area, I think that's helped us. Deion Barnes, former player of ours as a GA, was a huge help for us in the Philadelphia area as well. And I think we probably were a little more aggressive. Coach mentioned about having a little bit bigger class size to start with. That allows you to do that. You can put more offers out there early on. And I think that allows you to stay in on kids that if you were a little bit slower on, you might not have been able to stay in on. I also think that it's adjusting a little bit to the times and realizing that, hey, we tried to, not ruffle any feathers and kind of be more conservative in a way with offers, and making sure that every offer that went out was an offer that, was going to be good all the way to signing day in terms of space available. We've been more aggressive with that, and if spots fill up, they fill up. And I think coaches, particularly in the Philadelphia area, have understood that and have actually appreciated that from us, that we've been more aggressive with their kids out front.
Mark Wogenrich.
Hi, Andy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, appreciate it. I don't know if you addressed this already, but Coach Franklin said that he wants to be more aggressive regarding NIL and what he can do with players and what the program can do. What do players and their parents want to know about it? What are you able to tell them with regard to how Penn State can help in that respect?
Yeah, I think players and their families are interested in, what are the opportunities, for them at your university. Obviously at Penn State, we've got a great foundation. We've got a huge alumni base. We've got a lot of people that care a ton about Penn State football, about Penn State athletics. And I think that's a great starting point. And I think when Coach talks about being more aggressive, I think with that starting point, we've got to find ways to turn, that passion for Penn State football, and that's reaching out to those alumni and kind of informing them what they can do and the importance of it. We're all in this together. It's interesting, as a football staff, we work really, really hard in recruiting, and because of NLI, really more than any other time in the history of college football, I think there's an opportunity for people who care about the program that maybe don't work for the program to help with the recruiting efforts. And that's, NIL is going to be a big part of that. Those programs that have support from businesses, local businesses, businesses throughout the state, all of those different entities that care about your university and your football program, step up, and stepping up means, having opportunities for your players. I think that's where, we want to keep moving forward, and we've seen it across the country, and we want to, make sure we do the same thing here.
Mark Brennan.
Andy, you had camps again for this class. How important was that after not having them the previous year? And were there specific guys who really helped themselves at camps? I think you were probably on with James, and it sounds like Amari might have been one of them. Thanks.
Yep, Amari definitely was. I think an interesting piece about this year, and we refer to them probably all as camps. We had two things this year. We had camps, which we've always had. I say always except during our COVID period, but we've generally had every year. But the other thing that we did have this year, which I thought was great, and this was for the first time, we had individual workouts. And it's a little bit different. Only the coaches were allowed to be at the individual workouts. You could film them, and your coaches could be out there. It could be one kid at a time for kids that were in the 2022 class. So some of the guys came to camp, and some of the guys that signed in this class did what was essentially an individual workout that was the same as it would have been for camp, except they were doing it by themselves with our coaches. Omari is one of the guys that did that. And that was huge, huge for him. Tyler Johnson is another guy that jumps to mind. Both of those guys, without those individual workouts that were provided by the NCAA this year because of COVID, I don't know if either of those guys are in our class because they're guys that are a little bit further. Amari's obviously in Texas, pretty far away, and Tyler's, pretty far away in Virginia. I'm not sure if they make it here on a camp day, and we get a chance to evaluate them and see just how athletic they are in person from a coaching staff perspective. And I think that's something that, we're interested in. Hopefully the NCAA keeps that moving forward. It's very helpful because at the end of the day, I think for everybody that's involved in the recruiting process, I do think it's helpful because for us, we don't want to make mistakes. We want to be able to have as much information as we possibly can about the kid, about his family, but also about his athletic ability. And having the ability to do those individual workouts allows you to get as much information as possible because some kids can't make it on the day that you have a camp. Some kids may or may not be able to afford going to, 10 or 15 different college camps. And so to have the individual workouts, which were free to the kids, I think is something that was, was awesome for us. And I think awesome for the kids. And so those are two guys that jump out right away. We had a bunch of other guys as well. But those guys, I can say fairly confidently, if they had not come and worked out on our campus, I don't think they're in this class. And because they did, I'm real confident in the ability they have as football players because they showed it the days they were here.
Greg Pickle.
Andy, going back to the idea of, this being a bigger class, helping you guys in Philadelphia, maybe some other areas as well. Between the time you started doing this, the time you got to Penn State, whichever kind of time frame you want to use, how difficult has it been to accurately project? I mean, let's just use the class of 2023 as an example, maybe, or this class, however you want to do it, but project the actual space you have with all the different things we're talking about having to deal with here. How soon can you be certain you have a big class versus maybe not one as big as you thought it would be? Or what is that dynamic like when you're trying to figure some of this stuff out?
We try to project the following class right after the February signing period. Couple of reasons for that. First of all, that was, when I first got into it, that was the only signing period. So you were doing it then because there wasn't an initial one. So that was one reason. But the other reason is you get past all the guys that have to declare for the NFL draft. So that's a big part of your attrition. You get a good feel for what's happening there. You're now past, all the kids that you can sign in this class with the exception of transfers, which now has changed a good amount. But then it also gives you a really long runway of information to the following signing period. So really what it turns out to be is you're looking at your attrition data for about a year and a half what happens over the course of that year and a half. And the way that we chart it is we basically chart it for that entire time frame. And we look at it, every year, by month, how many kids that we have depart the program to be able to have a feel for what's going to happen in future years. In terms of how difficult it is, early on, it's pretty challenging in a program because you don't have a lot of data to go off of. You're going off of previous staff data, which is really helpful. And I think helped us when we first got here. As we kind of got into things a little bit further, I felt like the information kind of normalized, if you will. And you kind of had a good feel for, hey, we're going to be roughly this number of guys are going to, leave the program for a wide variety of reasons. It could be guys that, like I said, enter the draft. It could be guys that decide that they're going to, medical because they have injuries. It could be guys that decide to transfer. And that feel probably 4 or 5 years of being in here, it's kind of got a pretty good sweet spot going there. The last 24 months of college football, a lot of things have changed, a lot of rules changes. So moving forward, those rules changes are going to really impact, I think, what the numbers look like. The biggest thing, not necessarily being the transfer portal itself, but the ability to be a one-time transfer and be eligible right away. That dramatically changes, how the numbers look for you. And we'll have to, figure that over the course of the next couple of years. That's one big thing. And then the other big thing is the COVID year, having guys that can come back for an extra year. So, normally we're looking at what we would consider our senior class. And a guy, we'll use Sean Clifford as an example. Going into this year, in a normal year, we know Sean Clifford is a guy that's not going to come back because he's out of eligibility. He announced last week that or maybe early this week, that he is coming back. And, that's a guy that you're super excited that he's coming back, but you also now, that's one less scholarship that you thought you might have. Now, I will say this, we obviously projected, a certain percentage of those seniors as coming back. One thing that I try to do, I think as a staff, we try to do, not get too caught up in exactly who the player is that's going to either leave early for the draft or come back in the COVID scenario, and just think more in terms of big numbers. Hey, if we have, if we've averaged 2 guys leaving early for the draft every year, let's just say 2 guys are going to leave and not worry about who it is. If we think that, we're going to average over the next couple of years, 3, 4, 5 guys come back that could have, an extra year of eligibility, let's look at it that way as opposed to who that, individual might be. So it's a complicated process. You try and use all the information you have from the past to project the future. And then you try and figure out what might have changed in the, the recent, 12 months or 24 months that might change those numbers.
All right, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Andy, for your time this afternoon. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining on.
Thanks, Andy.